Welcome to the Spiggle Law Firm podcast. I am Tom Spiggle, founder of the Spiggle Law Firm. And on this podcast, we help people who've been fired or afraid they might be and discuss cutting edge employment law issues in the news. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that often gets confused by people, which is the concept of at-will employment and right-to-work states. But before we do that, a little bit of legalese. This podcast is not intended as legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship with our firm. If you need specific legal advice or need a lawyer, you got it. You need to go hire yourself a lawyer. So with that said, let's dive into this. So there are two separate concepts that sometimes get jumbled up in people's heads. And one is an at-will state. An at-will state is pretty much any state in the United States, except for Montana. I've never had a case in Montana, so I don't know how their state law works there. But in every other state, it's an at-will state, which essentially means that you don't have any obligation to your employer, and your employer doesn't have any statutory obligation to you other than not to violate employment law. So what does that mean practically? Well, it means in an at-will state, if your employer has a non-discriminatory legal reason to fire you, it can fire you, even if it's wrong or unjust or just plain dumb. If you work for an employer and you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, sorry, but if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan and your boss doesn't like Dallas Cowboys fans and you are fired, then that in an at-will state is going to be legal. Likewise, when you are fired, your employer is not required by law to offer you any kind of severance, although it may choose to do that for any number of reasons. And you don't, as an employee, have any obligation to your employer when you quit a job. You may give 2 weeks notice, you may give longer than that, but there's no requirement that you give any notice. You could just walk right off the job. And in most instances, you're going to have no liability to your employer. There's some obligations that you have to your employer, particularly while you are working there. There are laws that you can't steal the trade secrets. You can't do something in many instances that would, you're purposely trying to harm the company. Those can be legal liability. But other than that, if you decide one day, I just don't want to work here anymore, you don't even have to tell anybody. You just walk out the door. I don't think that's a good way to handle it. You probably would keep a better relationship with your former employer when you can. But there's no legal obligation for you to stay, and your employer can't come to you and say, oh, you violated this law. You didn't give me any notice, because it's an at-will state. One thing to keep in mind, it doesn't mean, sometimes folks think, well, if I'm in an at-will state, I can't sue my former employer because it's at will. And that's just not factually accurate, because in all of our cases, we're in at-will states. And if your employer violates the law, they discriminate against you, let's say on the basis of your skin color, on the basis of your sex, or because you have a disability, then you can bring a successful claim against your company. The fact that it's an at-will state doesn't affect you at all. So keep that in mind. So at-will state just means generally an employer doesn't have a legal obligation to you beyond not violating anti-discrimination or other workplace laws, and you don't have any obligation to your employer when you leave, except for while you're there, not purposely harming the employer, violating laws that would apply to your employment, like stealing trade secrets. But other than that, you don't have an obligation. You can leave at any time. One thing that can affect at-will states and your obligation to your employer and its obligation to you is if you're in a unionized employment, unionized workshop, and you're a member of that union under the collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, your employer may have some obligation, because that's a contract that the company agrees to with the union, and that may bind the company in some way to, give you some kind of severance, or that you need to give some kind of notice. So that would be the one exception. That's if you've got the collective bargaining agreement that sets out contractual terms that indicate that your employer and your employee, the employer and employee, have obligations to each other. So that's at will. Let's get to the next one, which is right to work. Now, right to work states, there are a number of them, mostly in the Southeast, some in the Midwest. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer. Right to work. I'm lay my cards on the table. Not surprising. I'm generally very supportive of unions, In right to work states, it means you can join an employer, and if it's unionized, you can't be forced to join that union or pay dues. The argument for that is right. If you want to join in a workplace and you don't want to join the union, fine. You shouldn't be forced to do that. The argument against it is that the union as a collective is trying to improve the workplace for everyone there, right? It doesn't matter if you're in the union or not. It's not as if the union goes to the employer and says, hey, I want to negotiate a raise, but only for my unionized employees. It's going to be for every employee in the company. If the union says, hey, we need a better break room, let's say, and they negotiate that, then every employee in the company is going to benefit that. And again, the argument is those who are benefiting from that are contributing or essentially freeloading on the work that other unionized members are doing. But apart from whether or not that's a good policy or not, when you hear somebody say right to work, they're talking about unionized shops. Again, can be very important, but for most individual employment cases, it doesn't really matter whether it's a right to work state or not. Again, unions can have their own collective bargaining agreements with the company in any state, and those can set forth obligations between the employee and the employer, and they vary depending on what deal the union has struck. So those can be in any state in the nation. So when we're talking about right to work, it's only about whether or not if you join a labor force that's unionized, whether you have to become part of that union. Again, neither of these terms really affect whether or not you can bring a successful claim against your employer. If your employer is guilty of wrongdoing, whether it's discrimination or violating your disability rights, any number of the laws that apply to employers that we cover here, then you can bring a successful claim. So don't be dissuaded by the use of those terms of thinking, well, I don't have any power here, because that's just not true. Now, you may or may not have a good case, but that's irrespective of whether or not you're in an at-will state, which is pretty much every state except Montana, or a right-to-work state, which are, probably there are a number of them, like I said, in the South and some in the Midwest. So I hope that clears things up. Remember that you almost always have some options. I'm highly in favor of talking to an attorney, even if you don't hire one, to help you unknot these. Right? Because you're going to hear all the people telling you all kinds, right? You're in a right to work state, you can't bring a claim. Oh, you're in an at will state, you can't bring a claim. And that, people may be well meaning, but they don't know what they're talking about. So go talk to a professional, even if it's just for an hour, to help you kind of figure out what your options are and how you can get your career to a new and better place. I hope you found this helpful. If you'd like some more information like this, you can go to our free resource called the Career Rocket. You can find it at thecareerrocket.io. You can get on our free email list where we discuss employment law issues in the news and other tactics that can help you keep your career on an upward trajectory. Also, if you found this helpful, please share it with a friend. We're trying to educate as many people as we possibly can. Hope you found this useful. Good luck out there.